All right. Uh, I am having a wonderful chat. You froze up there for just a second. My heart did a pitter patter. I'm having a wonderful chat with Baroque and modern cellist Charlie Rasmussen. He is in Milwaukee, and now I know you have a connection to Madison as well. We'll talk about that, Madison, Wisconsin. We're speaking about his 2018 Centaur CD release, a wonderful recording of the 11 Caprizi, the 11 Caprices for solo cello by Joseph Marie Clement d'Alabaco. Ah, got it right. And the years are kind of important
Yes.
because we're going to be discussing where this composer fits in the Baroque classic milieu, if you will. Born in 1710, died in 1805, and as you said earlier, Charlie, 95 years old? What was he drinking? What was going on? That's amazing to live that long. Um, but help. So this is a man of great interest, not only because these caprices are so charming and so wonderful, but because of this kind of little thing where at one point he's firmly in a baroque sort of performance practice in his writing ideas, and then he dips a little further into the classic period with some very interesting harmonic movement here and there. But here are 11 caprices that have that illustrate this bipolarism, if you will, that the composer was stuck in. Loving the Baroque period, living into the classic period, son of a very famous musician in the court of the Elector of Bavaria, Maximilian. So this is a young boy who was raised in that milieu, learned he learned his instrument and music from his father, no doubt, and then, of course, had his own career. So a very, very interesting guy. But let's talk about Charlie Rasmussen, for example, first. Let's get this guy clear in everyone's head. You play in the Wisconsin Baroque Ensemble, based in Madison, and your family's there
That's
or something, right?
yes, I grew up in a small town called Walworth, Wisconsin, which isn't too far from either place.
So that tells me the history of how come you keep going back and you're hanging with that Wisconsin Baroque Ensemble job. But and you also, however, teach at the Wisconsin Conservatory of Music in Milwaukee. So it's a little airfare
Yeah,
back and
that,
forth.
hmm
And what we talked earlier,
that is true. And I also,
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry, I was going to actually add, I also play in another early music group in Madison called Sonata a Quattro. And that group started more recently, and that's why it wasn't in the notes. So I do, and that group is also in Madison. So I do a fair amount of commuting back and forth.
That's nice. I like that. You get the stink blown off. You get out of one town and fool around in another, and then come back. I like that. Charlie has degrees from. Let me see here what we got. You got your master's degree from North Carolina. Master's degree, University of North Carolina,
Yep.
Greensboro, and you are a Suzuki method teacher, and I think that's interesting, and I want to ask you some questions about Suzuki method. It's been in my life. Everybody in music knows about the Suzuki method, but I'm not quite clear. And the Wisconsin Conservatory, I just read somewhere, this is a huge school for all people who want to make music of all ages. I think I saw something about 15,000 students have come and gone through the conservatory that's spread out in several communities. It's a wonderful service. How long have you been kind of doing that in the Milwaukee area?
I've been in Milwaukee since summer of 2016, and so I started at the conservatory at that time. And so I teach cello to a wide range of students. And so my youngest students are about 3 years old, and I also teach some adult amateurs and all ages and levels in between.
Yeah, and by the way, this is a tremendous service. So that people can, all people love music. Come on, they may deny it, but all people love music, and most everybody's had some kind of experience, and it's so nice if you're an adult to kind of go, hey, maybe I'll pull that clarinet out and take a few lessons, or just as an example. So these kind of schools are such a great service to communities. Um, let's clear the air a little bit about this, about in terms of your instrument, your bow. We've got a guy who's composing in two with a leg in both eras, the Baroque era and the Classic period. You have a classic cello. You're going to tell me about that instrument and what makes it different from 1775 or something like that. But you also in this recording you use a Baroque bow, which is different. So you get to do the lecture now about the difference between the two types of cellos, the Baroque cello and the modern cello, and the two types of bows, the Baroque and modern bow, and how come.
Yeah, so that's just a great question. And I get this question a lot. The differences between Baroque instruments and bows as opposed to modern instruments and bows. And so we'll start actually by talking about how the instruments changed over time to kind of develop into their modern form. Because, for example, we'll hear Stradivariuses or other instruments that were made in the Baroque era played in modern settings. And so the instruments themselves are the same, meaning the body of the instrument is the same. However, the setup has changed. And so usually the setup changes include taking off the neck of the instrument and putting on a longer neck that's a little bit taller, changing the bridge, the tailpiece, and of course adding steel strings, which add a lot of tension, which creates a lot of projection. And so the instruments kind of changed as in context of the symphony orchestra in a lot of ways, because, for example, as the brass sections got larger, the stringed instruments also had to get louder as well to be heard. And so a Baroque style instrument, what it has is, one of the biggest differences is that it has gut strings, and gut strings have a lot lower tension. And so you get a more warm and resonant sound. Of course, there are other differences in the setup. So, for example, on my cello, which, as you mentioned, was kind of a classical era cello, my cello actually has a shorter neck and it has a low overstand. So what that means is that the height of the neck above the cello is very low, and it makes it very easy to play up high. Of course, one of the most noticeable differences about the Baroque cello is that it doesn't have an end pin. And so players hold the instrument, what we'll call da gamba, which actually means between your knees. So we hold the cello without having the support of an end pin. And then going on with the bow. So for the classical bow, I should say for the modern bows, classical/modern bows. Those bows are curved this way, and what this does is this allows, when you tighten the bow, it allows the bow to have more tension. So it creates more sound, more tone. And what it also does is these bows, the bows that curve out like this, they're also designed so that it's easier to play with a very even sound in any part of the bow, any bow direction. So for the Baroque bows, so the bow I use is curved this way, and what this does is it really gives a different nuance to the music. So it isn't always even. Like, for example, up bows are generally weaker than down bows, which is stylistic in the Baroque era. It's also significantly easier, at least I find, to cross strings. So that shows, like, in a lot of Baroque virtuosic music, players would be crossing over a lot of different strings, and I think that fits with the bows that they were using in the time period.
And for this recording, which is really marvelous, and cellists should run out and pick up this recording of these caprices. They're such charming pieces. But you are holding the cello da gamba and playing with a Baroque bow, yeah?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to get clear about that style, and then and of these 11 caprices, again, we're going to speak in a little bit about how Bach-like some are and how not others are. Do these 11? I think I asked you in our last iteration of the conversation. Are these caprices, because they are so charming, really, or do they make study pieces, or are they a little too difficult, or a little too abstract, or what?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, like as far as yes, I mean, I think these are great pieces to study and great pieces to learn as well. I mean, as far as for say my own personal students, one of the things that is tricky about teaching these pieces, even if they aren't always as technically demanding, is teaching the style of the piece and also teaching the how to about ornamentation and embellishments. So the answer is yes. I mean, these are pieces that some of them, I mean, I think they could be taught, and they're very wonderful pieces. But I would also say that, right. But I think that there's a lot of stylistic things that go into it as well.
So the devil is in the details from the point of view of a student, embellishment. Yeah, a little bit. I noticed that you mentioned when we talked a little earlier that the embellishments on this recording are yours for the most part. Yeah, but there must be some that he indicated. Yes or no?
That is correct. Yes, he did indicate some some appoggiaturas. I mean, yes, but most of the other ones, and of course he indicated a few trills as well. But yes, but a lot of the ornaments were ornaments that I added, fitting within the style.
And again, in the Baroque practice, I'm thinking of opera arias. With each repeat of the phrase on so many of these caprices, you delicately ornament and change a little bit each repetition, just as singers would at that time, and it makes them the more charming. The tunes are some are very folk centered, it seems to me, but they're basically very simple in terms of comprehension for an audience. It's very clear, and the audience can enjoy watching the development, if you will, of these tunes in terms of ornamentation.
Yeah.
Now,
something on the ornamentation.
Yeah.
Can I? Okay, so
sure.
Yeah, and so one thing that's important to note with these pieces is that kind of falling in the style of a lot of music in the era, you would play the first section of the piece and then it would repeat and go back, as you were mentioning too in arias where this would happen, and then you play the second section and you repeat and go back, and the ornamentation would happen when you repeated and went back, and in the time it was considered to be standard for performers to embellish and to add things into the compositions. And of course the style in which players did that would vary based on the regions that they were in. So for example, French ornamentation is very different than Italian ornamentation, from the late 1600s. I mean, those are very different styles of ornamentation.
Yeah, and the French being particularly fancy. That's all I can think of.
Yeah, well, yeah.
French ornamentation.
Right.
So articulate, so busy and complicated compared to good, stout Lutheran German ornamentation. Did that make sense? Of the 11.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say ornamentation, right? So and so in a lot of in a lot of Italian music, I mean, so some of the main differences, and this is a little bit earlier than the time period of this CD. So for the Italian music, a lot of times composers would seek to kind of imitate vocal qualities on the instrument. And for example, if you listen to some of Vivaldi's arias and other pieces that he wrote, it almost like he wrote for singers the way he wrote for violin. And with this kind of this coldatura, where there's a lot of fast moving notes and things like that. But and in French music, the rhythm and of course the bowing styles were very important. In fact, I mean Jean-Baptiste Lully would conduct by hitting staff on the on the podium that you could hear while they were playing. So and so of course, right. So then the style in which players would ornament would often be based on the region that they were from. Of course, by the time that Dall'Abaco, even by the time he was born, the styles had kind of started to kind of mix together more. So for example, you had like I think about a great cellist and composer, Jean-Baptiste Barrière, who, of course, he published not as later than Dall'Abaco was born, but he did some, he definitely studied some Italian pieces too. So it kind of fuses the elements together.
Which is Europe,
Yes.
the homogenization of Europe. Even then, it's beginning. Music and so on is beginning to homogenize and develop as it does in the 19th century, in the 1800s. Of the 11, I have a couple of favorites I want to talk about, especially because a couple of.
Okay. Yeah.
But how about you? Is there? I know it's crazy. I shouldn't put you on the spot like this, but is there one that just? I think we've talked about number 11. Is that the one? Which one of these caprices tells you it's really juicy?
It's of course it's so hard to choose a favorite. I have to say that. Actually, one of the stories I'll tell as far as this goes was when I was recording these pieces, the engineer, we were going through and we would take a couple takes of each one, and we got to number 6, and after number 6, because usually he would come on and say, okay, we got that, moving on, and after number 6 he came on and he said, wow, what a piece, what a piece. And that memory kind of stuck with me because, and of course, before that, it's not, of course, I think number 6 is beautiful, but I just thought like, wow, that it kind of had that effect. I actually, and I guess that this may just be me at this moment. I think that my favorite one is actually number 7. Number 7 is so unique I think as far as these caprices go. He basically writes it. It's almost, like he's always writing chordal, texture. It's always double stops. And what he does is it creates a beautiful atmosphere. That I think it just, like I said, it's kind of a sublime beauty that this caprice captures.
Right, and also we're talking about the number 7 caprice, B flat major, and keys are important, especially in this period.
They are, yes.
Here are some of my notes about number 7 that you've just discussed, this B flat major caprice. That it seems more complexly organized, I write to myself, than the others. It's old-fashioned in use of embellishment, of paginatura, suspension, all of that gorgeous stuff, all the tricks of the Baroque, but there is something something interesting and more, perhaps a little more modern about number 7. Yeah?
Yeah, and I would say yes. It definitely does, right? It does, as a lot of the caprices do. It does incorporate a lot of these Baroque elements, but it also but of course, Dall'Abaco living, such a long life, it does infuse some of those classical elements as well. And I do agree. Number 7 does have a lot. It does have a lot that happens in that caprice.
And we talked off camera about the number 4, the D minor caprice, which is as a kind of student piece. In other words, some of these pieces are just a little bit too complicated in terms of what's needed to make them spring to life. Number 4 is a slower meditation, beautiful number 4 in D minor. Would that work as a good student piece?
Well, I would say actually, what I would say is, I think that I guess they all could work as student pieces. But what I would say with number 4 is that if I was teaching the set of pieces to someone, I would probably start with number 4. I think that there's a lot that you can do in number 4. And what I love also about number 4, it is, I don't know if I like this description, calling it simpler. But what I like about the 4th one is it also gives the performer more opportunities for embellishments and also for ornaments because it's not as written out as some of the other caprices are. So like, for example, in number 1, where a lot of those ornaments are put in the music so the performer knows to do them, but in this one there isn't as much written, so it's a great opportunity to also work on improvisation and embellishments. But yeah, I think these are beautiful pieces that would, that students could certainly learn. And I will add one other quick thing. I think that it's really beneficial to play them on a historical instrument and bow. I think that does make a very big difference as far as as to their aesthetic.
And you know what I mean, the
Yeah.
color, the quality of the sound, a gentler, more baroque sort of quality of sound maybe is there in his music, and so in respect for it, yes, I agree on authentic instrument, authentic bow. Number 8, the G major. Here, this is a charming little dance tune. I'm just looking at it, but it's quite
Is.
different. You know, it's a kind of folk tune-ish. It's more complicated. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about
It is.
number 8.
So number eight, right? So number eight is kind of almost like it's almost in like a minuet kind of a form. I
Almost.
mean, it's not really a minuet, but it's kind of in this, ding dun dun, one, two, three,
Hmm.
right? So it's in this kind of a form, and right, and so what he does is this one is also, I mean, it's also set up kind of like a rondo would be. And so what I mean by rondo is that there's kind of a main theme that comes back throughout, and then there are variations that go in between. And again, with number eight, one of the interesting things about number eight is that at the end of the manuscript, there is a repeat sign written at the end. And so I chose for this recording to take that repeat and to also ornament it. And I mean, and I think that in context, I mean, it works out as a great spot to add some ornamentation into this piece.
Exactly right, and that's what repeats are all about in that period
That
of
is, yes,
music. You know, it's all about you don't just play it again, silly. You play it again and
right,
show off all
right.
your virtuoso expertise. Number 11, that's the last one of the series. It's an F major. I'm mentioning these key areas not because I'm a musicologist, but because key is crucial to mood and texture and so on, and major keys as opposed to minor keys. All that everybody knows all about that stuff, but this F major, this beauty, and especially at this time, classic with the crossover Baroque to classic period, composers were very much aware of the emotional content of keys and in this case F major. I find it by the way, as we discussed, I'm so curious because these 11 seem almost to be chronological. You can almost hear him developing as he moves perhaps if we have any idea of when these are written, closer and closer to coming to grips with the classic period. But F major is very interesting. It's probably very hard, and it also has a lot of wonderful processes, the double stops, all those devices that he uses so well. Tell me a little bit about number 11,
It,
the last
it does. Well, number 11 is unique on a couple grounds. I mean, I would almost think of it as kind of the finale to this set of pieces. And this one maybe is the most classical sounding out of all the caprices. And by classical, just for those who might not know, classical refers to music, say from the time of like Mozart and Haydn, whereas Baroque is more sounding like Bach or Handel or Vivaldi. And so with number 11, what's interesting too is that Dall'Abaco changes. He changes the character in it. So it starts kind of with this slow introduction, and then of course, we get to the spot where there are all these string crossings, and all of a sudden, it's fast. And then of course he keeps alternating between these slow sections and these fast sections. And so this is really the only caprice that has an indication of a tempo change. In fact, most of the caprices don't have any sort of an indication as far as the tempo is concerned. And one other quick note about number 11. One of the something with number 11 is that the last page of the manuscript is missing. So number 11 is not complete. And so in order to complete the caprice, what I did was I took material from earlier in the piece to complete the caprice.
Makes very good sense. Bravo, and thank you for that confession. I would have had no clue. I jokingly kind of use the word bipolar, but number 11 also to me is a little of both. There is this part baroque sensibility. It's a noble key area, and the double stops and all the rest of it, and the various devices. So it's a very unique, and also this business of meter change tells me that it might have been written later also. You know what I mean? When composers start paying
Yeah.
attention to
Well, it
better
right.
instructions.
Well, and it was. I'm sorry to be clear. It wasn't meter. It was a tempo
Tempo.
change.
Sorry,
It's a
that
tempo
was my
change.
mistake. Yeah, it's
No,
because
that's
I'm
okay.
obsessed with Beethoven. I'm just recently realizing that the metronome was the golden. I don't think had been invented quite yet here by 1805, but it was it was the miracle machine for
Yeah,
Beethoven and others. So they
not
could,
right.
so that's if I'm indicating if you're indicating that by number 11 there's a little bit more indication from the composer, then I would say it's probably later. He's beginning to be able to indicate more specifics in terms of tempi, and so. But
Right.
those fast things are tough, and there's a dotted rhythm in there that's very tricky. Yeah.
Yeah, which part? There's the
Well,
da 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 da
yeah,
that. Yeah,
and it's such a
it's a
sudden
beautiful
change.
moment though. I love.
It's
Yeah, I
great.
love the character of it though. It really adds a lot. Yeah.
So it requires, I think, a little more experience and expertise, possibly. You know what I mean? We talked earlier about what pieces here might be good student pieces, and I don't mean student
Oh
beginning
yeah,
students.
I think I agree.
This one's
If
tricky.
I was to teach these pieces, I would probably teach this one last as a set of pieces. Right. Yeah.
More proof positive about the possibility of the chronology of these 11 caprices. Now, I think we talked, but I want to make sure everybody who's a cellist out there knows that there are 40 cello sonatas by Dell'Abaco
Yeah.
waiting out there. By the way, is this composer
There-
well known among cellists, or is he still relatively obscure to cellists?
Yeah, so that's a really good that's a good question. So yes, there are approximately 40 sonatas. Most of them are not published, and right now what's happening is that there's kind of a slow chain of them that are starting to get published, which is great. Yeah, so Joseph Dell'Abaco is and this is it's kind of a fascinating story because. So in the early one of the earliest volumes about the cello, which was called "The History of the Cello," and it was by Edmund van der Straten, if I'm saying that correctly.
Got me.
And yeah, and one of the things that I think is really fascinating about it is that he does mention that Dall'Abaco was kind of considered to be a great cellist in his time. But then, of course, but later on, right, he became more obscure. And anyway, so it's kind of interesting how that worked. But yes, I would say that Dall'Abaco's works are generally not well known by cellists. I'll say personally, I didn't discover these pieces until I had been playing Baroque cello for a few years. And I was, going through and digging up, all kinds of solo pieces that I had no idea, existed. And so, like I said, and it's just so wonderful discovering these pieces.
We're going to have to wind it down here, but I just want to conclude with this idea, which is from my experience, because I'm hearing from all kinds of composers and musicians all over the place with their CDs. I remember when I was younger, it was something about, well, you play these guys, who cares about those other guys? They're obviously obscure because we know nothing about them. There was sort of a bad attitude, frankly. And what I'm seeing in terms of recordings, including yours, it's a great service, what you've done with these 11 caprices, is more and more musicians are discovering this glorious wealth of incredible music and are recording it so that the other musicians can perform it. So I think that's where we're going to kind of wind it down. Charlie Rasmussen, cellist, what a fun conversation we've had. We're talking about your 2018. That's like it's practically fresh off the press. Centaur CD 11 Caprices for solo cello by I get to do it again. Joseph Marie Clement Dall'Abaco, 1710-1805. A guy caught kind of in this thing between the Baroque and Classic period, which makes his music so fascinating, so interesting. Um, what have I forgotten? What's up? Are you going to have a look at any of these sonatas maybe sometime down the peak when you raise enough
Yes,
money?
I mean it is certainly on my goals. I personally though at this point, I mean I've looked at some of their Like I've listened to to any clips of recordings I could find, or anything like that. But yes, it is definitely something that I do want to dive into, are these sonatas, because I've been thinking about how how great these caprices are, and how wonderful the sonatas would be as well.
Yeah, and just to confirm, because I want everyone to know about the blood, sweat, and tears of producing a CD. You have to raise a whole lot of money. You got to work with a whole lot of people. It's a big, complex process. So I salute you, as I do all people who produce CDs. These are labors of love, and they are the most, I mean, my experience overwhelmingly has been of the most incredible, wonderful, marvelous music now being recorded. So congratulations, Charlie Rasmussen. You have really done a service with these 11 caprices of Dell'Abaco, and maybe some of the cellists out there in my audience are going to have a peek. All of this information, how to buy the CD, the whole bit, your bio, all that good stuff, our video interview, it'll all be up at performingartsreview.net shortly. And great pleasure talking with you. Thanks much for the time.
Yes, and you as well. Thanks,
Okay,
Dan.
appreciate it. Bye bye.